Do you think it's possible for Israel to even survive in a multipolar world? It seems like they could only exist with the US backing, that this is that
Uh,
giant. But in the world that we're entering into now, it'll be a world where the US can't push everybody around and dictate the shots. We are moving to a multipolar world. It
yeah.
seems clear. It seems inevitable. It might take 5 to 10 years for kind of the new everything to shake out and fall into place and people understand the rules of the new world. But in that new world, which we're, I think, inevitably heading to, can Israel survive in that world?
Well, it's kind of, I suppose they could, but it just becomes much more difficult. I mean, I think right now we're witnessing the transition, from a unipolar world to a multipolar world. It's happening before our eyes. And actually, this war in Gaza is part of it. It's in fact accelerating the process. The the U.S. is desperately trying to keep things as they were, to maintain the status quo, in which they were again, the unrivaled power pretty much worldwide, but especially in the Middle East. For the longest time, all these various, uh, peace negotiations, peace formulas, whatever, where they were all sponsored under the aegis of the United States, um, because the U.S. was just the dominant power, and everybody recognized it, whether they liked it or not. But that's changing now. We can see it's already happened with, I think recently the Arabs, or there's a conference planned, as I understand, right, of Arab nations, but with the sponsorship this time of China, or at least this is something that's in the offing. And that would never have happened before. Now, it doesn't change anything immediately in the short term, but it's indicative of a long-term shift in power and and how this conflict, if it ever is resolved, it may not be resolved. It may be resolved. Maybe with the assistance or sponsorship of China rather than the U.S. Again, I think we're
Mm.
looking years in the future.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I feel like in this new world, Israel wouldn't will have to change its policies or become a complete pariah,
Yeah,
which it's already becoming a pariah other than the United
right.
States only. So
Yeah, well, again, I mean, obviously Israel has relied on the U.S. To to conduct the policies, to carry out the slow motion ethnic cleansing that it has been carrying out over the past several decades. The U.S. has protected it from various pressures, UN resolutions, and so forth, to get it to withdraw from the occupied territories. It's never
mm,
had to do that because it had the U.S. at its back, and the U.S. was the unchallenged. It seemed like a very safe position, and it's still the U.S. is very powerful, and and is enabling, of course, Israel to do what it's doing. But its power is waning. I think everybody can see it, and I imagine the Israeli leaders realize this too, but they don't see any alternatives.
hmm
So they're going to stick together, and then the U.S. on its side um, knows that this relationship is becoming increasingly toxic, right? And that it's had to pay a very high price, because of its unconditional support for Israel. Um, and well, that was so you get forces on both sides. I mean, there's this U.S. power is diminishing, and then the U.S. itself is sees that is has to be aware of its growing weakness, and has to be aware too that Israel is contributing to this trend. That's so these are all, again, in the short run, it may not make a bit of difference, but the long run, the trends are looking very bad for Israel.
hmm Yeah, it's kind of ironic because it seems like we become aware that we are kind of losing control. And the more we do to try to preserve the unipolar system, our global hegemony, the faster we are eroding it.
Right.
We're doing that in Russia. We're doing that, you're talking about with Gaza and Israel, Palestine, Israel, and the same thing with Taiwan and China. All of our positions here are trying to preserve that hegemony. And the more we try to preserve it, the weaker we become and the more exposed we become because we don't want to cooperate and move forward into this multipolar world, and it's becoming so apparent in the rest of the
Right.
world